In the interest of time today, we're going to jump right in and start the questioning. We have timers up front. Shauna Kersey from the Board of Directors of the Chamber of Commerce. And Carrie Todd, I think, is on her way. They will be giving our legislators a 1-minute heads up and at the end of 1 minute, a card saying, "You're done, please stop." And at least once, somebody will actually watch those cards, I know. Okay, so let's get into our program. I'm going to jump into the questions. This was one of the most unusual sessions in our history, with virtual testimony being the only thing allowed, 3 people in support of a bill, 3 people against a bill, and then the bill's sponsor. And it was a unique environment, and probably as little public testimony on bills as we've had in a long time, and as such, I think there's probably as little known about what actually happened. So we're looking forward to this period for the legislators to give us an update. Let's start right in. The legislature overrode the governor's veto of the digital advertising tax bill, which was designed to raise about $300 million to help fund Kerwin. So the question is, in an environment where we're arising from a pandemic and businesses are struggling to begin with, why would we consider a significant tax increase, especially considering the amount of money that came from the federal government to the states and actually resulted in a windfall? So I'll open that right up. Let's start with economic matters. Shall we go? Delegate Adams.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, and Salisbury Chamber for the opportunity to be here today. We, as a legislature, certainly the Republican caucus, believe that we should have done no harm to the business community at large. I think Peter Francho actually said that a handful of years ago. It surely applies today. So when we were dealing with the override of that veto, that was a straight-up tax increase. And think about it as businesses are trying to reach people at homes on their computers. That is a tax on the advertising that they spend to do just that. That also relates to consumers using Netflix at home now with COVID. And so the timing and the posture of a bill like that didn't seem to mesh with what the Republican goals would be, to make sure that if we're going to do business regulation and taxation policy, that we actually adhere to the Augustine Commission, which would have certainly opposed that sort of timing and that sort of tax during this time frame. So that's my time's up.
Senator, thoughts on that?
Yes. Am I on?
You got to use the other microphone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What was the question?
This digital tax, is this the right time?
Yes, we worked on that in our committee. Chris, that bill, as you know, passed in the 2020 session, digital sales tax, and then the advertising tax, and we went through the total override. But in reality, what happened in our committee with the bill is that it reduced that tax for media and broadcast media papers. So that was a change, and that was a decrease from the existing bill that had been overruled through the governor's veto and overridden. And I think some of the folks were thinking that, during COVID, our bigger industries who are advertising on our phones on a regular basis were making tons of money. So the perception was, they could absorb that gross tax on their digitals, on their advertising.
Delegate Sample Hughes, and before we have her answer to that, I am remiss in not pointing out that we have 2 things to recognize. Delegate Sample Hughes is the Speaker Pro Tem of the House of Delegates, making her second in command. Obviously, those folks in Annapolis, they may not know much, but they know where to find talent. And Delegate Adams. Delegate Adams was just elected as the Minority Whip. Delegate Sample Hughes.
Good afternoon to all present. It's great to be back home and to be able to have conversations such as this. with regards to the digital tax, that bill was actually in before we were under the unfortunate circumstances of COVID. That bill was in prior to that, and it was discussed last year and voted on, but the governor vetoed it. So what it does, it modernizes our system to ensure that we are capturing taxes from persons who download apps, and music, iTunes, all of those things. Whereas right now, prior to the passage of the bill, you would go into Best Buy, you could download your music, and you would pay a tax. But if you did it online, then you would not have to pay a tax. So it levels the playing field. And as the senator indicated, it excludes cable and satellite providers. But overall, you know, this particular piece of legislation will provide at least $150 million towards our education system. So to that end, brick and mortar entities should not have to carry the total burden. Thank you.
Senator Carrozza?
First of all, I want to thank the Chamber, and I want to thank all of our partners for holding this forum here today.
Normally it's a-
Especially in our COVID-19 recovery, and we are coming out of this. It's even more important that we have these partnerships and these type of events. As far as the tax increases, we need to keep in mind that, you know, really the last action we should have taken is to increase taxes during the pandemic, and it ended up being, you know, $250 million tax. And this is at a time when we did not need to increase taxes, not only for the pandemic, but that we actually had a $700 million budget surplus and a $1.4 billion in the rainy day fund as we're going through the pandemic. So, you know, this is a situation where some of us took the position that this is not the time that you increase taxes during a pandemic.
I should point out, everyone has these 3x5 cards at your table. Please feel free, if you come up with questions for the legislators, as we have time permitting at the end of the program, just raise them up high like you're doing right back there, and a member of the chamber staff will come by to pick it up, and we'll do our very best to get everything entertained. There was a pledge not to increase unemployment insurance after this last session, but what ended up happening is every business was moved from Table A to Table F. So within the rating structure, there was no rate increase, but almost every employer that wasn't already in Table F is seeing a significant increase in unemployment insurance, some as much as a 400% increase. So the question is, another financial dagger for Maryland businesses. Will you all call for a special session to legislatively enact a backfilling of the depleted unemployment insurance trust fund with Biden relief dollars to restore businesses from Table F to where they were originally? Let's start with Delegate Motz.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
use this one.
Now you can hear me.
There you go.
Apologize for being late. I had a medical issue to take care of this morning with my mom. But it's great to be here. It's really encouraging to see a pro-business group gathering. It's first of its. We haven't had enough of these during COVID. To get to the answer to your question, no, I would not call for a special session. We have 30 seconds. When you call for a special session, you are inviting things to which you couldn't possibly imagine. It is a huge problem right now, the unemployment charges that businesses are receiving. The explanation from the government to me is not acceptable, and I don't have a simple solution on how to resolve those charges, and I am one of the recipients of those charges.
Anyone else like to chime in on that one? Senator Eckert?
Yes, thank you very much. This was a question I had actually for the governor's staff.
Sure, you can chime in unless you want me to do it. You are? Okay.
The bills, and my understanding, and I'm not sure it's acceptable either, but what was presented to me is the rates were determined at a point in time from this last year, and so you can't just upset that whole schedule. So it will probably be equalized, if you will, in the next year. We also put funding in the budget from the feds to be able to backfill and be able to begin to replenish that fund. So it should level itself out, but it was a big hit right now.
I'll just, I won't be redundant because the senator covered how it will play itself out, but we did pass numerous pieces of legislation to reform the unemployment system because it is pretty much an issue that is raised and that is being experienced by a lot of our constituents. We look to help the businesses deal with their contributions and reimbursement payments by delaying those so they don't have to pay one lump sum. We also looked at the special enrollment periods for health benefits throughout the unemployment insurance. So it's a very comprehensive effort, and it takes more than 30 seconds to get the full understanding out to everybody. But we've seen the system is broke. We have phone calls and emails on a daily basis from citizens who are in desperate need of unemployment assistance because there's no answers when they contact unemployment. So that's a fight that we're going to continue to have to fight, but it's something that requires a lot more time to discuss. But thank you.
So I'll tag team on what Speaker Pro Tem said. The governor, the Senate President, and the Speaker on March 21st announced that $1.1 billion of federal dollars were going to be backfilled into the UI Trust Fund, which is important to business owners because it does affect the contribution rate. While we're in Table F currently, there was a bill that passed, SB 811, that actually will, in fiscal year 2022, put us into Table C. That's a piece of emergency regulation that will directly benefit the business community on this issue. I would like to say that, especially here in Ocean City, that we're very concerned about those that are on unemployment and they're not seeking work. The Maryland caucus for the Republicans actually wrote a letter to the Secretary asking them by June 1st to, if you're receiving unemployment benefits, that you actually are out seeking work. That's the standard for unemployment benefits, that you do that. Currently, what we're finding is possible employees are not actually looking for work, and this is something that we need to fix. It was talked about this morning, and so this is what we're hoping the Department of Labor will do here shortly.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to another one, and as a matter of fact, we had a prepared question for this, but I'm going to use one from the audience which was written that addresses the same thing. Are you assisting with the rural broadband projects on the shore, or would you like to work with local partners and founders to create solutions that appeal to our affordable solutions that appeal to our communities? And I'll start with Senator Carrozza.
First of all, I can assure you that this delegation has worked hard in a bipartisan way to make sure the shore and our rural areas receive the funds for broadband access. If we learned anything during COVID-19 is that this is an immediate and urgent bipartisan priority. And I just want to point out that whether it's telehealth, telework, education, whatever service you're relying on, that what we need to do as a delegation is ensure that all these funds that are coming down, that we receive our fair share in the rural areas. We have been working on this issue for years before other legislators across the bridge discovered the need for this. So you saw us as a delegation work together on that to ensure that we would receive our fair share of funding.
Delegate Hartman, could I get you pointing on that?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting us. As Senator Carrozza mentioned, the entire delegation here, and this is something, putting party affiliation aside, everyone is 100% committed to. I was glad to see it be part of this session today, but we actually funded millions of dollars. I don't have the specifics in the budget. The emergency relief bill that we passed, and if somebody here has the number on the top of their head, I'd appreciate it. But literally, it's a priority. It started in last year's session where we passed legislation to help one of the local providers with right-of-way. So everyone here is 100% committed. The Department of Housing and Community Development is taking over a lot of the funding for the disbursement, and I think that's a good move in having an administration that's good with getting the money out there to where it needs to be. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
Delegate Otto?
Greg, if I may, it was $300 million that went to it, and it wasn't all dedicated to rural broadband. That was what the fund was for essentially, but it expanded. We found out through the pandemic that our urban areas have a lot of access problems as well. And how that's divided up will be determined. We have Chop Tank Electrics here today. They have an initiative that's going to broaden the base for our rural areas. Obviously, it's been important to me. I have to go to Salisbury or Princess Anne to do these Zoom meetings. God forsaken. But I can't even get a call in my home anymore because of the service that is provided by AT&T and Verizon and other providers. But hopefully we're working in the right direction. We have money that will go toward that end, and I thank you.
Sure, everyone just doesn't want to call you?
Johnny calls me occasionally. It's usually about 12:30, 11 o'clock.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we have been working on this for a very long time, and I jumped in to be able to work across the aisle with the delegate from Baltimore City because I want to make sure we have a more rural voice in all of this. Because we have been working through the community housing and community development at Rick Gordon's shop, and they've been very good about honoring local control, which means it goes to our local jurisdictions. We're able to network, we're able to do an assessment and make sure we still know where the redundancy is and where the lack of connection is. And so I have great confidence that going forward, when I was begging for $20 million and we got $300 million all across the state, that is a big down payment on getting us connected in the next 5 years.
It feels like every session, someone on the Western Shore, in fact, many someones, decide that agriculture is a bad thing. And seemingly, we are continuing to fight the battle of the reputation of what agribusiness does to the environment, despite the fact that the scientific data doesn't really support that. So the question is, moratoriums on chicken houses continue to emerge every session. What is our Eastern Shore delegation doing specifically to help address these broad and overreaching attempts to regulate our industry from afar by individuals who are not experts? And I don't know, maybe this will change now that they figure out that we're raising more hemp than we are chickens, but based on this morning, that might change. Until then, what are we doing to address that? Delegate Motz?
It's cannabis that they want us to raise the problem. But, we had a few years ago, we had a gentleman, Montgomery County delegate, he had a bill in to dredge a canal, a pond in his development. And said that the soil test levels were this and that, and I said, my God, Shane, are you growing chickens around there? But the science is what's going to base these things, and I don't know about the moratoriums, but we had a court case by advocates on the environmental side that sued about ammonia dispositions, and they went to Montgomery County to find the expert judge to make that decision. So those are the things that are challenging, and the state is appealing that decision. So we're working hard, all of us, in this delegation.
Delegate Sample Hughes?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that what we are doing, we kill a lot of those bills. And that's the reality of it, And that's the reality because what you all pretty much hear are the bills that passed and the ones that you don't like, but what you don't get to hear is the fact that we intervene from different angles to kill those bills before they get out of committee and come to the House floor. But I will go from a positive perspective now. But we passed legislation to, help the agriculture community. One in particular deals with tree plantings by allowing a person who has agricultural land to get an incentive of like $1,000, and that's through the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So we have programs in place to preserve our agricultural land, and yes, also we educate our colleagues from other parts of the state of the need for agriculture and for the poultry industry. The last thing I will say is that this pandemic did bring about the need for chicken. I say that because I had my colleagues from Baltimore County call me personally and ask if they could get truckloads of chicken to Baltimore City and Baltimore County. And yes, Purdue did that, but they now have a better appreciation for what we do.
There. Senator.
I'll just add on. So I'll take a moment and just say, as being elected minority whip, the minority leader is coming from Allegheny County, Jason Buckle. And so we're both rural legislators. Buckle's from Allegheny County, the mountains. I'm from the beaches and the Chesapeake Bay of the Eastern Shore. We both share common rural values. So when you ask questions about, access to care, whether it's agriculture, all these things that bind us together, Jason and I have voices that we've earned our right to be heard on the House floor to articulate conservative values. I think it's very important that you understand as a group here, and I think we get it on the Eastern Shore, is that it's not always Republican versus Democrat. It is often urban versus rural, and it's an education component, sharing with our urban partners why things are different on the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, and try to win some of these cases on their merit. So when Speaker Pro Tem says we're killing some of these bills, I've seen her firsthand advocate for rural values. My job and the Republican Party's job is to make sure we're branding ourselves as being the right to be heard on these issues so we can make an impact on rural issues like agriculture and poultry.
I'm going to combine two questions from the audience that I think are overlap to a degree. Can you share any information on the let's try it this way. As police services are curtailed, how do you plan to attract visitors to the Eastern Shore if they feel they're entirely unsafe, especially considering the loss of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights? And coupled with that, on a little bit of an offshoot, some members of the legislature want to remove school resource officers from our schools. Where do you stand on the use of SROs?
I'd be happy to.
Well, first of all, thank you for that question. And police reform was one of the bills that an enormous amount of time was spent on. Instead of us focusing on COVID-19 relief and other priorities, we spent an enormous amount of time on police reform bills. And I will say initially, in the beginning, on the Senate side, there was a bipartisan push with the members of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee who worked with law enforcement and actually came up with some bipartisan bills that we could support. I actually voted for 6 of the 9 bills. But when it got to, we were not able to have a conference with the House. We took a whole different approach and put everything in an omnibus bill. And that is why we're so concerned about these police reform bills that passed. In the interim, we're already working with law enforcement. I just met with the Sheriff Lewis and others to talk about what we can do in the interim for corrections, because some of those bills just went too far as limiting the authorities of law enforcement. So this will be ongoing and it will be a top priority during this interim.
Delegate Sample Hughes?
Sure, so I'm going to respond to you in the reverse. You asked me where I stand on the school resource officers in school. I'm in favor of it. I cannot support removing them from the schools, and I have my personal reasons and I also have my professional reasons. Professionally, I believe that we need to make sure that we have law enforcement in addition to providers that provide health, mental health, and social input so they can really connect to the real and the heart of the issues. But we did pass legislation that trains law enforcement a lot stronger in the school system, so they can know the difference between the administrator's rules and responsibilities as well as law enforcement. The police reform was necessary, and it is necessary. A study was done by the Governor's Office on Crime Control that indicated and showed that 50% of our African Americans that are killed by law enforcement reside in the state of Maryland. We need to make sure that reform is in place because we should be able to go all over our state and know that there's some consistency in the use of force, know that there's consistency in how people are going to be treated. The last thing I will say about this particular bill, which again is more than 30 seconds, is the fact that we did positive things in this bill. We provided $8.5 million to training to help get them educated and go into law enforcement so it's more diverse and it looks like the entire state of Maryland if you choose to go into the law enforcement field. Those are numerous things that we have done that were positive pieces out of the legislation, and I know it's important for us to continue to do more towards that end.
Delegate Hartman, after last summer, this has to be right up your alley.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, across the state, regarding school resource officers, it's clear that the public has a high regard for school resource officers, and we were able to kill that bill, keeping school resource officers in place. Secondly, with police reform, you know, it was a tough session, spending a lot of time on police reform, but I can tell you, coming from an area like we live right now and where you are right now, where law enforcement is appreciated, I actually think it may be an opportunity for us for hiring and getting the adequate number of law enforcement members we need here. When you think about the state and some areas where law enforcement may not be, for lack of better words, respected or is appreciated as much as here, hopefully we'll be able to continue hiring and maintain our adequate numbers. I put my end of session letter out on all the tables. I appreciate if you would take a look at it and read it, especially the last line. When you see law enforcement, we need to let them know that we appreciate what they do and thank them for what they do. So that way we can keep our law enforcement here and let them know that we want them. And that's the best thing we could do here as a community.
Near and dear to most people's heart in this room, civil immunity was not addressed in the legislative session this time. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal famously pointing out a restaurant in Ohio, this has been 6 months ago, that had 7 lawsuits filed against it by patrons who alleged their civil rights were violated by having to deal with the restrictions for COVID, and another 7 lawsuits had been filed by folks who claimed that they'd gotten COVID from the restaurant. And the litigation costs by themselves are enough to bankrupt many of the small businesses represented here. So the question is, given that we took no action and there's no cover coming from the federal government at this point, in fact, I asked that very question, of Senator Cardin last week and was told basically that's a state issue. So given that that's a state issue, Senator Carozza, why don't you weigh in on that?
So first of all, I want to thank the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce and Bill Chamber specifically because during the interim, during COVID-19, he convened these basically these calls, and we had the small business restaurant owners, members, some of us on it, members of the Hogan administration, and we addressed these issues. One of the issues that came out of that was the need for civil immunity for our small businesses who are in good faith, have their protocols in place, and protecting them from frivolous lawsuits. Because of that was raising that issue, and then I took that issue to the bipartisan Senate Small Business Work Group. We actually then used that to have a bill even introduced. So had it not been for the work of this group, that bill would not have even been introduced. The bill did not go forward, but I can tell you, I was a co-sponsor of that. Senator Chris West was the sponsor, but I can tell you we used that leverage of the need to provide relief for small business to leverage passage of another bill that helps small business, which was the SB 210, 205. It's the bill that allowed restaurants to deliver and carry out alcohol with a food purchase. The reason I'm tying the two together is both came out of the work of the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce in those calls, and we used the one bill, even though the trial attorneys were blocking the civil immunity. We used the need for that to leverage and try to get some relief on another piece of legislation, and we were successful in doing that.
Delegate Motz?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think this is absolutely something that needs to be addressed, and it is a state issue. The business community, we want answers, and we want answers now. We want some security our committee's Economic Matters Committee, and this bill issue was debated in the Judiciary Committee or the Judicial Proceedings Committees in the Senate. And, you know, we're still in a state of emergency, and I expect next session for this to be one of the hot topics of discussion. This session, it seemed like the policymakers don't have, or we didn't have an opportunity to delve into this in a serious way that it needs to be delved into. Now, I don't say I didn't, because I live in the world. I'm ready to vote on a bill, and I can propose a bill in about 30 seconds. I just think as the whole, the body, the timing wasn't quite right. The plan is that COVID ends, we get back to business, and come around next session, this would be a hot topic would be a high priority for consideration.
If I may speak for the business community, we agree it's a hot topic. That's an interesting segue to what may be an interesting question that I'm curious to hear your various responses to. Given that as we look across the landscape of the United States, there seems to be an inverse relationship to the amount of lockdown and the results from COVID. I'm not blaming any of the governors who took those actions. They were doing what they thought was best based upon the data they had. But what we have now discovered, I think, as a country, is that these draconian economic killing lockdowns have been counterproductive. And the question is, because we, as a group of states, gave executive fiat the power of law over the past year, is there any plan that you have to restrict that in the future? How do you deal with the idea that a future governor could do the same thing, and maybe at a different level? Delegate Hartman?
Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on this. There were several bills not only aimed at limiting the governor's power, and it was also at the county health department. So if anyone's here from the county health departments, no offense. But the bills, unfortunately, the one I'm referring to with the health department, because I think that's where the local businesses felt it the most, where the health department could come in, shut down the businesses, and there was no recourse. There was actually a bill heard in Health and Government Operations, and I got to tell you, the community did a great job. The business community did a great job as far as coming out and supporting the bill. The Restaurant Association, the chambers, and what it did was it created an appeals board, and the appeals board would have been made up of at least one business person, and it allowed a hearing within 3 days. So it exactly addressed the issue that you're talking about with that overreach. And unfortunately, that bill never, it was heard in the committee, but never had a vote in the committee. So basically, one person, the committee chair, has the ability to hold a bill, kill a bill, and that's what happened there. But I want to thank everyone for the great support on that piece of legislation.
Delegate Adams, I know halfway through the pandemic we had a discussion and you were in support of the governor's response. How do you feel today?
Well, playing Monday morning quarterback on an issue like this, I think, is very difficult, at best. I think the governor was making decisions based on guidance that he was getting. Using the executive order, we may never see in our lifetime again a scenario where an executive order is being used the way this is. The legislature did pass laws this year that will allow the legislature to decide how this gets handled in the future, as opposed to allowing the governor to stop through executive fiat. And so the Essential Worker Protection Act is that piece of legislation. So, we're interested in protecting our citizens. And governors are not perfect. I think that they are given the tools that they were given. Maryland has an exceptionally strong governor. The powers that he had were unlike almost any other governor in the country, which meant he was able to act faster and more responsive to the issues at hand. Other states, I think, had to wait for the legislatures to act, like Virginia, for example. And when the legislature acts through statute, that's unyielding. And it's also very difficult to watch government try to ham-hand its way through a pandemic. I think that on balance, in what I said to you earlier is the governor was able to, on 43 separate occasions, amend that executive order. So I can report back to you today that I think the governor did what he felt was necessary. He was elected, responsible to the citizens that voted for him. And, I think looking back 20 years from now, we'll never see anything like this again. And I think the legislature passed laws that will not put a governor or a future governor in the same spot.
Record.
Thank you very much. I know the governor said at the beginning that there would be the whole control and more input.
That is a tough question.
And there were some pieces of legislation that will make sure that there is involvement, at least from the legislature. I was privileged to serve on the vaccine clinical subcommittee from the Senate, and we started pre-session, and then we went through session, and we really would give feedback on a regular basis into the whole epidemic and the vaccine distribution, and call attention to where the disparities were. And together we were able to see a significant amount of change as we dealt with the shortage of vaccines, the plan for rollout. So there was a piece of legislation that we would expect that there would be a 2-year plan, and then going forward, we have mechanisms in place if we go down this road again.
Delegate Mouch?
Yeah, I'd just like to add something to the event we just experienced. I've got a deep concern about the executive order in perpetuity. And I've heard this discussed amongst other delegates. It's something I think is a great idea, is that have a periodic time, a limit on how long the executive order can continue on. Maybe even including a chance for the legislature to consider whether the executive order should stay in a limited capacity. Also, in my experience, has really highlighted the autonomy of our health departments. Who is the overseer, who is the direction, and what is the role of the health department, which is a much more complicated scenario to address. But I think both of those areas have become points of consideration from what we've just experienced and what we're still experiencing right now. For instance, the rules that we have here on the shore should not be the same as the rules in other parts of the states that are much more populated.
Let me take a very interesting question from the audience, which is, gas tax revenue will obviously be reduced if we transition significantly to electric vehicles. How would we replace the tax revenue? Senator Eckert.
I'm on the committee.
That wasn't a missed opportunity for you, it was a missed
Yes,
opportunity. I mean, it is what it is.
shutdown. So, and we had a big fight. We resurrected the big fight again between do we put our motor vehicle taxes and gas taxes to mass transit, or do we put it into roads and bridges? I haven't seen that fight in the Senate floor and in our committee for probably 15 years, but we were back on it. So we made a commitment that we're going to start this year. We are going to be looking at stable sources of funding for one or the other, or both. So stay tuned, and I would welcome your input on that, because I think we will start having those discussions, and it's going to be a little brutal, but we will get through it, because we're going to have to do it, as you said, with the way we're putting emphasis on alternative sources of fuel, particularly on our transportation system.
Delegate Sample Hughes, I will direct this question to you because it comes from your area. Can you share any information on the American Rescue Plan? How and when will local governments receive funds?
Part of that is really still at the federal level, so I'm going to take the time to say what we have received. Monies in transportation to the tune of about $233 million, dealing with the transportation question that you just asked just a few moments ago. Numerous funds have come down to provide our local government relief from some of the challenges that they have had. So the conversation is still going to continue, obviously, because we're still in this pandemic. And so looking and working with our Maryland Association of Counties and Municipalities, I think that would probably be the most effective way to get the information out to all.
Delegate Otto, would you like to weigh in on that?
Which question? I'd like the first one. Miles traveled, electric cars, and the road taxes, and the gasoline taxes. I mean, we have a challenge there. I mean, there's all kinds of things batted about in our committee about a roads tax, a mileage tax that you'd have to report every year, and us in the rural areas will suffer from that. I mean, we subsidize the electric cars every way. They get a $2,000 subsidy against their when they buy the vehicle, and then most of them can go to any kind of charging station and not pay a dime to charge the vehicle. I mean, it's a challenge there. The other aspect you're talking about is, what was the second part of the question?
I think that's good.
Yeah, thank you.
If you get to choose what you answer, I get to choose what I respond to. One last question. And that is, just to give you a heads up, you'll each have a minute to generate a response in any direction you'd like to go. So if you want to be thinking about that as we go through the last question. Governor Hogan's Redistricting Commission will have their recommendations ready by the next General Assembly session. What will be the course of action if the legislature chooses not to accept his commission's recommendations? And I'll start with Delegate Sample Hughes.
Sure. So I think only 2 of us up here on this stage have been through the redistricting in the state of Maryland before. The others were new to this. But what I will say this is that since the information from the federal government has come out, or not as quickly as it has been in the years past due to many circumstances of continuing to get the census data in, that moves our process a little further back. So in the legislature, around December or January, that time frame will be the time where we will take up the redistricting, and we will have our own set of public hearings, just like the governor will, and do it from a robust fashion. So it very well may require us to go back in special session, or to have a special session to address all of those things. So that's our plan of action, and that's where we know what we're going to then have the Rules Committee review the information, vote it out, and then bring it to the House floor for a full House vote.
Delegate Adams.
So the governor has talked for years about having a nonpartisan redistricting process. It's important because under O'Malley, we had what was called a hyper-partisan map. It was contested in courts, and it's a matter of history that we don't want to repeat. The nonpartisan commission is going to be public. There are going to be hearings throughout the state. These are things that citizens should participate in, no matter what your party affiliation. You want to know how this is being done. The more public participation during these hearings that are going to happen throughout the state, the more the governor, through this nonpartisan commission, will be able to influence the outcome of this map. It's important that we have ethnicity, party affiliation, gender included. We want geographic areas that are compact and representative of the citizens that are ultimately that we serve. And so currently that's a real challenge. We have multi-member districts, and I'll say to you that I think that fights against some of the local action that we can take as legislators when we carry large districts. So we'll see where it goes. Obviously, the legislature gets a say in this. The governor gets to write the map. This independent commission has a real opportunity to affect and influence the outcome.
Hartman, I've heard you expound on the single representative district. Would you mind doing that too?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. As Delegate Adams said, when you talk about multi-member districts, a Senate district represents about 120,000 people on average, and there's typically 3 delegates under those. So some areas have 3-member districts, some have single-member districts. So if you have 3 people being elected from a populace of 120,000, if there's 80 or 90,000 of one particular party, then they could probably sway the votes for all three of the delegates that get elected. So with a single-member district, you have a better shot at true representation, whereas if you're taking and breaking that down into a 40,000 person segment, that 30,000 people I didn't mention, because the 80 or 90,000 in one party, the 30 or 40,000 in the other, could actually pick up one of those delegate seats, and then you would have better representation. So between that and using natural boundaries, for example, Delegate Otto lives in Somerset County, represents Somerset and Lower Worcester County. I represent Northern Worcester and Eastern Wycomico, but yet Delegate Otto represents Berlin, all the way up to Atlantic General Hospital. So that's the type of gerrymandering that's happening right now, and those kind of things need to be fixed. And I think that's going to happen with this bipartisan commission.
Okay, to close out our session this afternoon, I'm going to start with Addie, and we'll just go across the line. You have a minute to close in any direction you'd like. Senator Eckert.
Thank you very much. Well, despite all the controversy in this session, we did get a lot accomplished because COVID really highlighted that a lot of our ongoing issues that we have been dealing with. Broadband was the biggest swing for everybody here on the Eastern Shore. But I would suggest to you that our health team has just been a star through COVID because of their responsiveness, and I think we really owe it to them to continue to build that backup workforce that spent so many hours. So workforce, education and preparation, the residency program, how we get CNAs into the workforce, how we continue to deal with our opiate and heroin crisis, how we deal with potential suicide. There was additional funding which also will come down because of the use of telehealth to be able to reach all of our citizens who are vulnerable. So we put a lot of additional resources this year into all of our vulnerable populations so that we will begin hopefully to address the very obvious disparity that we have in delivery and services.
I'll have to tell you, in my 7 sessions, I've never worked as hard or prayed as hard as I did this session. And you've heard from Senator Eckert and Speaker Pro Tem that we did a lot together that was focused on COVID-19. If you'll recall, early on, we passed a COVID-19 relief package that was actually signed into law by the middle of February. And that was between Governor Hogan and our leadership on the House and the Senate, and provided needed relief for working families and individuals. So that's something that, we did our job there. We have one constitutional job to do as members of the Maryland General Assembly. Pass a balanced budget. We did a good job with that. We had a lot of targets that were able to provide for some short priorities. You heard about broadband. We did a lot of good there. We did a lot of good with telehealth. I'll tell you where I think where we fell short. Because of these Zoom hearings and limited public access, where you all in the past have been able to come up on some really key issues, whether it's police reform or taxes or small business, we didn't have that. And that, as a result, I believe because of those limited Zoom meetings and not hearing the full testimony, that you ended up with some bills that went further than they normally would if you had had the public access. And I specifically point to police reform and the tax increases and some of the small business bills. So we know that now, so it'll give us plenty of time to work hard during this interim for you. And I also want to let you know right now, many of us are focused on this acute, immediate workforce shortage in this area, and we will continue to partner with you and work on that challenge.
I was going to say, what a coincidence. We pray every time you guys go in session. Delegate Sample Hughes.
Thank you for the question. What I would like to say is that, people, and I've heard it often say that, this is certainly a different session and limited access and things of that nature. But our bottom line goal this session was to make sure that all of you were able to see all of us still being alive. So many people have died from the COVID and have not been protected, and we made sure that by having 2 separate chambers, our membership was safe. We had no outbreak of COVID. So that was a priority, and I ran the 2nd chamber, so I know that. So the point is that we had a lot to do, and we accomplished a lot. We walked away with bills to support our business community. One bill in particular deals with telework. Now that we're looking at things a little bit differently, but providing $9 million for businesses to be able to help get the infrastructure and the equipment that they need to be able to allow telework to still be a viable option. We addressed the education system. Matter of fact, as of today, our HBCU lawsuit has been settled. We were able to ensure that $577 million will be going to our historically black colleges and universities. We also made sure our community colleges were in a better situation, because when the budget came to us, there were cuts to the budget for our community colleges. We restored that. We also made inroads again as around the policing efforts to require law enforcement to have body-worn cameras by 2025. Those are many things that we were able to do, meanwhile, while carrying our own bills. I had several bills of my own. I'm still in the health committee, and there were ones that I passed that dealt with dementia by making sure citizens would have proper training when they come into their home to take care of your loved one. So a lot of work has been accomplished, and I'm proud of the work, and we still have our members all safe and still alive.
Amen.
I want to acknowledge Susan Jones. We talked about workforce shortage, and you'll hear so much about that in the coming months. She wrote a letter to the Secretary of Labor related to this, and it's so important that we get this right from a government standpoint. Getting people back to work, getting them off the incentive of being on unemployment is really going to be a tremendous headwind for any type of economic development we want to have as a state and frankly as a country. So I saw that, and I also know the Secretary of Labor is hearing you on that. So very good job advocating for Ocean City on a national level. You're on television. I thought that was quite impressive. I just want to take a minute and talk about the budget. If you stood here last year and said we were going to pass a balanced budget during the throes of a pandemic, how proud am I to be part of the Maryland General Assembly to watch us pass a structurally balanced budget with $1.4 billion in the rainy day fund and $700 million in the fund balance. I can go on and on about what we prioritized, but we were able to meet every single demand and obligation as a state to serve our citizens, to fully fund health care, education, the vulnerable populations in our state. Personally, there is no way, based on what was happening last year, that I thought we'd be able to deliver on that. It's the one obligation that we have as a legislature is to pass that balanced budget. Everything is icing on the cake, depending on how you look at it politically. But we delivered on that. I'm proud to stand here today and say that we did that for you today. Thank you.
Yeah, and the session, there definitely were things that were accomplished in the session that were positive. There were also, as was mentioned, there were some significant rough spots. The process was definitely flawed, and I don't think that process will happen again. One positive thing is most of the debate is recorded online. You can go back to the General Assembly website and hear about some of the discussion, and will help you better understand some of the things that went into some of the actions that the legislature took. This past year has been like no other. The session was like no other. I think this coming year ahead of us is going to be like no other. Before session, I felt that we really should have only focused on a couple of issues and then recessed. Things like vaccines, fixing the unemployment system, and businesses that are affected by COVID. Police reform was a top thing, and then hold everything off. But that didn't happen, and I expect this coming summer to be unlike ones that people in this room are used to. And I'd encourage you not to sit back and wait to see what happens. Things like what's going on in the workforce, the unemployment charges that are going out, our difficulties in dealing with COVID regulations, all these things that are happening, we can't afford to look the other way, and we're going to have to engage. It was a really trying year from my perspective, but I know that we are a vibrant, strong, innovative people that can overcome just about anything.
Greg, thank you. I want to compliment the timekeeper here. Zoom meetings and committee meetings and And we gave each person 2 minutes, but they had to sign up 48 hours ahead of time. And the sponsor got 4 minutes, but she's done an excellent job of keeping us moving, and I think the panel has respected it. But we did pass a $52.4 billion budget. I was a page in 1982 when Harry Hughes introduced a $5.5 billion budget. I entered the legislature in 2011, and it was a $38 billion budget. So I don't know what we're doing or where the money's going, but somebody's flush with it. And I'm not part of it, but I think there's better things we can do with the money, and we need to tighten down and figure it out. And I thank you for social distancing here and for keeping the payrolls going. And society needs you. Whether you're a restaurant that's struggled this whole year just being closed down completely, or other operations, we need you to make things happen. And it's a challenge now with the logistics to get anything. I've been in business, and fortunately our business was essential, but what does that mean? So I thank you all.
Delegate Otto's version of a gun control bill is to make sure that Kerry doesn't get a weapon next time. Delegate Hartman, bring us home.
Well, thank you, and I don't know where I was when Harry Hughes was governor. I'm trying to think. I don't want to offend you, Delegate Otto, but I wasn't in a page in the General Assembly. But anyway, I want to remind you the end of session letter. A lot of work goes into that. I'm going to gauge whether or not I do it next year based on how many are left behind. So if a lot of people leave them, I'm going to stop doing it. It'll be a good excuse, no. So just please take them. Going up to Annapolis this year, as you heard, I thought the big thing was going to be the budget and COVID protection. We mauled over 2,400 bills, so it was a huge surprise, very different than what I thought we were going to go into. It was challenging for people to sign up to testify. The hours were limited. They were during the day, so kudos to everyone who did. I know a lot of people in this room actually went through that challenge and did it. One of the things I'll be working on, my top priority is going to be the labor shortage. I'm representing Ocean City here and the entire Eastern Shore. I mean, we depend on a seasonal economy, and any letter I get from an employer stressing the challenges they're having with getting employees, I forward to the Secretary of Labor, to the Governor's office. I send them suggestions. Some people suggested a bonus for people to come off of unemployment. I've heard people, I've sent suggestions that, we give them a couple of weeks of additional unemployment even after they're hired, just to get people off the couch or out of bed. So, I'll continue approaching legislation with a conservative and pro-business mindset to it, and I'm being cut off here. So, thank you for being here, and encourage you to use our office anytime we can help you with a state agency or, any challenges that you're having, reach out. Thank you.
Carl was dealing with a constituent issue. He did text me well over an hour ago, and I know he was probably breaking the law trying to get down here, but we appreciate you being here, Carl, and he'll be around if you have a question for him. He was instrumental, along with the delegation, in getting the Horizon legislation through the General Assembly. Thanks to him and the delegation, it went through both houses unanimously. So now let's hope Wycomico County does what it's supposed to do. That's my comment on that. Hey, before you leave, this is a chamber program. It's the MEET program. There's materials on your table. It's the multiple employer aggregation program. Our member, Steve Smith, is here, and I think he can explain more about it. But it's a way for you to potentially save money on your employees' 401k programs and take all of the administrative baloney off your hands. And for small businesses, that's a big deal. Really quickly, the chamber is going to be 101 this year. We missed our 100th anniversary last year because of this thing called COVID. But we're having a big party on the Wycomico River at Green Hill Country Club on Friday, the 16th of July from 4 to 8. Live music, tons of seafood, tons of food in general, great networking. Yes, there will be adult beverages. It's an adult event. So I encourage you, when the tickets go on sale in a few weeks, to get your tickets because they will go fast. And we'll be back here in Ocean City for our general membership lunch on June 17th at the Dunes Manor Hotel. It's a regional luncheon because our speaker is the new CEO of Piedmont Airlines, Eric Morgan. And I think you'll want to hear what Eric has to say about their presence at SPY Airport, as well as how American Airlines is faring as their parent company. So get your tickets for that June 17th. Again, my sincere thanks to the delegation. You guys, we communicate regularly on a lot of issues outside of session. They are accessible, they are helpful, they are committed, and knowing some of the other leaders in the General Assembly that I know from the other side of the Bay, I think this group is unmatched. So my hat's off to all of you. Thank you for being with us. And we'll be back for the 2022 Southern Delmarva Economic Forecast in December, and we'll be back at Salisbury University. Have a great rest of your week. Please drive safe.